Retro.
Are you an aspiring Jedi, or do you dabble with the dark side of the Force?
Regardless of whether you fancy yourself a defender of the light or an aspiring Sith Lord, you're going to need a lightsaber.
Podcast Stardust is pleased to partner with Saber Masters, the creators of high-quality, durable, and affordable lightsabers.
Saber Masters is preparing to launch the Ultimate Lightsaber 2.0, and right now you can get 2 for the price of 1.
So, check out the link in our show notes and go get your Ultimate Lightsabers from Saber Masters.
And don't forget to use our referral code Stardust to save $10 at checkout.
And each purchase using our referral code helps support Podcast Stardust.
Hi, this is Emily Swallow, the armorer in The Mandalorian. You're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. This is the way.
Hello, and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And this episode features the next installment of our series dedicated to the 25th anniversary of the Phantom Menace. But before we get into that, Jay, can remind everybody where we can be found around the internet.
All right. Well, we can very easily be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the dish is aligned, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, we're now broadcasting to the galaxy. And as you can tell, just like with our Acolyte episode, I'm still a little under the weather, so my voice is a bit off. I apologize for that. Thanks for indulging us and coming back for this episode as we get into this conversation. So, Jay, we are getting into the Podrace, and this is a 15-minute segment of the film. I didn't find a good place to split that up, so we're just doing the whole 15 minutes here, which is really fine because this movie's over 2 hours. And it doesn't divide up into 12, 10-minute segments anyway. But this is a good one.
Yeah, it really is. And it's a really great conversation we have coming up as well.
All right. Well, let's not waste any more time. Let's dive into the Podrace. And so we are joined by this segment's guest, Anthony King from Force Ghost Conversations. Welcome back, Anthony. How are you this evening?
Hey, Dennis. Doing great. Thanks for having me back on. And good to see you too, Jay.
Absolutely. Yes, it's finally great to talk to you. Last time we did not get to our paths did not cross when we had you on last time. I got to listen to you though, so that was fantastic.
Yeah, I'm glad that the thread of destiny has been pulled, that it allows us to both all three of us to chat for this wonderful portion of the Phantom Menace.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We're recording on a Wednesday night. Thursday's usually our danger nights. No storms this time around.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. But yeah, you were here last time, last year, about a year ago, when we were doing our movie segment. And so now we're back for the Phantom Menace. We always kick these off with our questions for our guest. Jay, you want to go ahead and get kicked off with question number 1?
All right, Anthony. So we're going to go back in history here.
Okay.
Your personal history. So tell us about your first experience seeing the Phantom Menace. So do you remember where you saw it, who you were with, initial reactions, any fun stories, any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, great question. So I don't remember a thing about it. Well, let me preface that. I don't remember a lot of things about it. So I was 4 at the time that the Phantom Menace came out. So I did see it in the theaters on opening night with my uncle. It's a wonderful memory that we would recollect back on as the years went by. But really the only things of the movie that I remember are just seeing like Sidious, especially when he would say things like, "I will make it legal." Like that terrified me as a kid. And of course, Maul was also nightmare fuel. So those were some of the big pieces that I was just like, oh my gosh. And I think I probably dug my head into the cinema seat many times. Anytime that either of those two characters came on screen, I think I really just dug my head into the ground. But I just remember the hype surrounding the movie so much. I remember I believe Burger King had the toy line associated with it when it came to their kids meals. So I begged and pleaded for my mom to go every time that we could to get a new set of toys. in regards to that. But this is just and then as I got older, the movie just has, meant more and more to me since then. But yeah, that's from humble beginnings, let's just say.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you, Darth Maul hit the mark then because the initial concept design was told to be the worst nightmare you've ever had. So there you go.
Yeah, and then I feel like every kid that Halloween dressed up as Maul, or to some degree of Maul, and
Ah,
then as they came to the house for trick or treat, it just further reignited the nightmare every time.
wow.
All right. So, yeah, this reminds me, because I was about that age when I saw A New Hope for the first time in theaters. So, our second question: what is your favorite scene from the Phantom Menace?
Ooh, my favorite scene. That is wow. Today, I'm going to say it is the opening sequence of the movie, and I'm going to be very specific about what in the opening sequence it is, and it's going to be Qui-Gon putting his lightsaber through the blast doors, or trying to get through the blast doors, right? That is a moment where I feel like anything is possible, right? And that's a really powerful moment in the movie for me because of that. And the music swells at the same time, and this is again is supposed to represent the Jedi at the height of their abilities and their powers and their influence in the galaxy just before the Empire comes into power. And again, it's just one of those things where I'm like, okay, this is what the Jedi are supposed to be. They can do anything if they set their minds to it. And Qui-Gon is currently doing that before the droidekas come, and that's just a moment that always stands in my mind as being really important. I'm also going to put a caveat to that, where some days it might be Qui-Gon just sitting down on his knees as he's just about to face his own doom or demise at the end of the movie as well. So we're bookending it with Qui-Gon at the beginning, Qui-Gon at the end, both very important Qui-Gon moments. But I'm going to say today it's that opening scene.
I love how you put that though, because I'm with you. There's different scenes that may resonate on different days and just whatever mood I happen to be in. And, we've mentioned that several times that I think we all evolve as fans as well. So, 5 years from now, you ask me that question again, and it may be completely different.
That's right.
Mhm.
Absolutely. All right. So, kind of bouncing off of that, then, who would you say is your favorite character in the Phantom Menace?
Hmm. I think it's gonna be Qui-Gon today, and that usually is a answer that sticks with me. I think that the philosophy of Qui-Gon, right, the patience that he teaches, is something that should resonate um, with the concept of Star Wars being this story that is meant for 12-year-olds and the 12-year-old within all of us to learn these important life lessons, and use this modern mythology in order to become better people at the end of the day. Everything that Qui-Gon spews about being patient, living in the moment, um, just not thinking too far into the future, not reflecting too much on the past, being present where you're at right now. These are all important philosophical things that I think we could all take into our daily lives. So I'm going to say Qui-Gon for that. I also think that he does a great job of just portraying this empathy and kindness throughout the movie that I think is also something that people should embody a bit more. And if we could all be more like Qui-Gon, I think the world would be a better place. So I'm going to say Qui-Gon Jinn.
Ah,
I like
excellent.
that. I like that. And because this segment we're about to talk about is one scene, just the pod race, that gives us an opportunity for me to ask you something I've been talking about here on our last few segments when it comes to Qui-Gon. And that is, what's your take on some of the scenes with Qui-Gon, and I'm thinking of the interactions he has with characters like Watto,
Mm-hmm.
where Watto doesn't want to take Republic credits. So
Mm-hmm.
Qui-Gon tries to convince him with a mind trick. Repair
Sure.
credits, we'll do fine. And we there is the end game of this, the ends is this to get the Queen to Coruscant, to get relief, to save Naboo. But do the ends justify the means? What do you think about the morality of using that mind trick on Watto to try and get him to do something that he clearly does not want to do? And then later,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, in the moments that precede this scene, when he's trying to gamble with Watto to get Anakin freed because he believes he'll be
Mm-hmm.
the chosen one, he influences the dice roll with the Force, and he goes into an elaborate scheme with Anakin to arrange this whole thing, to take advantage of Watto. So it's an open-ended question, but what do you think
Yeah,
about
yeah.
Qui-Gon's Jedi ethics in that case?
These are great questions, and honestly, you're giving me a lot more to ponder afterwards here, because this is a perspective that I haven't thought of too often. This is a great question, actually, in light of the Acolyte being in the conversation for Star Wars fans right now, because it's forcing us, not necessarily forcing us, but it's allowing us to challenge conceptions that we have and expectations when it comes to this stuff. That is a great question about the ends justifying the means there. I will say to Qui-Gon, trying to influence him to use Republic credits, I'm going to say that is right now, just off the top of my head, I think that is okay to do that, because Watto is trying to barter with him, and he's trying to just get to the point. And it's not like he's trying to take it for free, right? He's still trying to offer him a fair wage, at least. I don't know what the conversion that the money that he would be taking is in Republic credits versus, but again, I think it's probably comparable. I don't think Qui-Gon is that much of a guy to rip him off on that end. And again, if he really wanted to, he could have just taken it. He could have, through other ways too. He could have just hacked him down and did a non-Jedi thing, and then taken the parts and went away. So I think that one is okay too, and also, morally, I think in the Republic where Qui-Gon was living, slavery is outlawed, and I think they agreed across the galaxy that it is a negative. He didn't come there to free slaves though, so he didn't free all the slaves, and he's just freeing the two in the moment. I'm going to say again, he's doing what he can do in the moment, and that is a slavery is a wrong. So he's righting a wrong in that, even if it's just saving Anakin. He'll take the win where he can. And the thread of destiny and fate had it that it was going to be Anakin and the chance cube. So that is it. And then the rest of Star Wars goes as it is, because Shmi stays back, and then that forces Anakin to keep his attachment to her, and then Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to say in the moment it's for the right reasons and for the right causes, but from a different point of view, from Watto's point of view, he definitely probably sees it on the opposite there, but he also shouldn't have gambled in the way too. Like if he didn't want to lose his, he found a weakness in Watto, which is gambling, and if he didn't want to, and it was in Watto's, he's the one that brings it up. I have a chance cube. Let's try this out here, and Watto should have been more aware that a Jedi could potentially influence that in some way. So that's where I'm landing on that one today. But definitely a great question for me to ponder a lot more for the days and weeks to come, for sure. So ask me like next year when we do this for the next movie. Just go on a tirade and bring it back to that conversation. We'll see where I land again.
Well, it's quite a forced conundrum, honestly.
Yeah, it's a question I haven't firmly come down on one side or the other. It's just what I found is that the format that we're doing this review of the movie over the course of the year gives you the opportunity to focus on much smaller segments of the film, and then the details that are in those segments that you might not have stopped to think about and ask about in the first place.
Yeah.
And I agree. There's certainly something to say, he's looking out for the greater good. So taking advantage of one greedy Toydarian along the way, but the path to hell is paved with good intentions. So
sure. Yeah.
And so anyway, I mean, the fact that Anakin and Shmi are slaves makes a lot of this a lot more forgivable. But
I agree. Yep.
Again, taking advantage of someone's weaknesses, that's, the context here is huge. And so anyways, hey, look, Qui-Gon's my favorite character from this movie too, but still, he's a bit of a rogue when it comes down to it. I think we'll just have to live up to that. All right, well, let's get into this segment. It runs from 55 minutes and 2 seconds to 1 hour, 10 minutes and 4 seconds. So yes, this is larger than our usual 10 minutes, but you can't split the pod race in half. You just can't. And this whole thing opens up with a shot of the pod race venue, stadium, whatever you want to call it. And we have our two announcers, Fode and Bede, that welcome us to the pod race, and they start introducing all of the racers. And so we got Ben Quadraneris, Bowles Roar, Sebulba, Mahonic, Clegg Holdfast, dubbed Bolt, Adi Mandrell, Anakin Skywalker, Rats Terrell, Gasgano, Team 2, Pagalis, and Mars Guao. And no, I did not know all those. I had to look up a lot of them on Wikipedia. Guys, you have any favorites among the pod racers other than Anakin, of course?
Oh, I absolutely do. Rats Tyrell, for sure.
Oh, yeah?
For sure. I am I love the backstory of the introduction of his family just as a random caveat in the movie, and then just as the story around Legends and canon has built up the story of that family, and then knowing that he's one of the pod racers that actually passes during the sequence, right? And then of course you introduce the family to then know that he doesn't, he's not coming home that night, and you see the young kids there, just like, wow, of course they're adding in the stakes to this by introducing that. But it's just that little detail that I think that is so important and pivotal in the Phantom Menace that just adds weight and brevity to this sequence.
Yeah, because you see them a few times in the
Mhm.
movie
Yep.
before the pod race, and like right after Qui-Gon, Jar Jar, and Padme arrive in town, you see them in the background, and the little baby kid is like chasing after Nunas or something in the
Mhm.
street,
Mhm.
and yeah, and then you see them like weeping later after he's crashed in the
Yeah, you see the
aftermath
mourning
race.
afterwards. Oh my
So
gosh, yeah.
yeah, quite tragic. Jay, how about you? You got a favorite pod racer?
Well, of course, we love Sebulba.
Mhm.
And so I tend to gravitate towards him just because he is such poodoo. But I also I love Cleek Holdfast too, because he's just so, like prim and proper.
Yes, that one's very good. I'm partial to Adi Mandrell and his pit droids. And then, of course,
Mhm.
Ben
Mhm.
Quadraneros, who never gets off the starting line. Those are also kind of fun characters there. But we need to see more of those alien types in Star Wars when it comes down to it.
Mhm.
So after the racers get announced, which I think that's an incredible little scene and a very clever way of doing it, because we have that panning camera shot as it follows Anakin and the droids as his pod is getting pulled out onto the track. And then it stops every once in a while to, focus in on one of the pod racers. And it's a way to just kind of give us an opportunity to see all of them without diving into exposition
Mhm.
on it. I mean, they really do set it up. It's like you're watching NASCAR or something at
Yes.
home. And so very cleverly done by George Lucas and this scene there. And then, they have all the pageantry that comes with it. The flags get pulled out onto the track right beforehand. All wonderful, only to have an EOP fart and make Jar Jar sneer. I know that's there for the kids, but do you have any thoughts on just kind of like breaking up the mood there?
Well, as the 4-year-old that saw this movie, I was the intended audience, so it worked for me. I do remember laughing at that sequence. So it just adds to the duality of this film, where both can exist, right? Where it's the grand epicness of this, with the parade, the flag parade music swelling, which I think is one of John Williams's most beautiful pieces that and underrated,
Mhm.
pieces of music for this movie amidst Duel of the Fates and Anakin's theme and other stuff that goes on in this sequence. That's a really great just musical piece. I love the American Graffiti of it all, with the influences of racing that is very much important to George and his life. And then of course there's the slapstick Three Stooges humor that also is
Mhm.
intermittent throughout this movie at various points. So I can see why it doesn't work for people. It works for me. I mean, even the two-headed announcers, I forget their name, but you listed them earlier there, Dennis. They can be, I know, some people's not favorite part of this movie too. But again,
Mhm.
those all work for me. I was like, oh, funny guys. So as the target audience, I can admit it worked.
Mhm. No, I love how you talked about, Anthony, with that underrated piece of music, because I am totally with you on that. And I played my flute a lot, and this was one of the songs that was on the little CD play along
Ooh,
thing.
nice.
And so yeah, so I just remember it's very majestic, and it's got a lot of those like triplicate type of things in it. Da 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 da,
Hmm. Hmm.
kind of a thing. And so, just quick aside though, I absolutely love the fact that 3PO is the one that's carrying Anakin's flag out. And of course, he's like completely quote unquote naked, according to R2D2. But yet he's still, carrying the flag for Anakin, which he does his whole life, kind of a thing. He's always thanking the maker. But one of the things that I always wondered about was, is there any significance to the blue markings that we see on Anakin's pod? Because I know back in the day, this is just a quick aside, a lot of the ladies at the time, we carried a flag for Anakin once he got older. But it was very, in a lot of ways, reminiscent of the Japor snippet that he carved for Padme, that Anakin carved. But I was always wondering, what was it that symbol actually stood for? Do either one of you have any clue whatsoever?
Fortunately, I don't.
Dennis?
No, I don't know, and that is a good question. There's a lot of creative flags and symbols that get brought out there onto the track. I like your observation, Jay, that it does resemble at least somewhat the carvings that he puts on the Japor snippet, and so it's clearly designed of some sort that means something to him. Alternatively, since he is Watto's property, it could have been something to do with Watto and the Toydarians. Or even alternative to that, I mean, it didn't look like any Jedi symbol I'd ever seen, but again, this is supposed to be a pod that Qui-Gon acquired in a game of chance. So I'm putting my money in one of those three things. So
my headcanon is always that it was a symbol that Anakin himself came up with as almost like a seal or a coat of arms, if you will, for the Skywalker name.
I like that the best, I'll tell you. That works for me.
Yeah. I saw somewhere recently that in one of the episodes of the Clone Wars, Anakin has a poster for the Boonta Eve classic up on his wall. In his chamber. And I didn't catch which episode that says, but I'm going to look that up again. And then after we're done here, probably go watch that just to see that, because I don't think I ever noticed that before.
Yeah, I think it has like Ben Quadraneros on it too.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
But one of the other things that you said there, Anthony, that I want to touch on again is that, how important, like racing was to George Lucas, and American Graffiti is huge film that he made prior to Star Wars here. And so if Attack of the Clones is the romance Star Wars story, then the Phantom Menace is very much the racing Star Wars story. That is the big unique element that they put into this. The closest thing you get to it is a motorcycle race in Return of the Jedi, when we have the speeder bikes going on. And so everyone likes to talk about ring theory, poetry, yada yada, Star Wars rhymes. But this is that scene times 5.
Oh, for sure.
And then they do so much world building on top of it. And a lot of these elements we'll get to as we go through the race itself, but spectators and then accidents happening on the race, the backstory of some of the racers that's suddenly put into the background of this movie. And then just everything that can go wrong does go wrong for Anakin over the course of the race, yet he still overcomes the odds. So it's just something to keep in mind as we get through this. Okay. So Anakin's getting ready to climb into his pod. Shmi shows up and tells him to be safe. That's about all she says. Sebulba wanders by and sabotages the pod and then threatens him. You aren't going to walk away from this one, you slave scum. And Anakin's response is, don't count on it, slimeball. So, hey, that's what 10-year-olds do when they're insulting people. But the sabotage there, I guess it works just fine for me. Don't get me wrong. I mean, and this is a Star Wars movie and stuff like that. But that was really out in the open for him to get away with. But what did you think about? I mean, is that just a symptomatic of this is the type of race it is? Or is Sebulba really getting away with something? That's kind of a clumsy way to ask the question, but I think you get what I'm asking.
Well, I mean, I think this is just the nature of how these races go, right? They're so dangerous. Everyone is trying to one up each other. There are no rules as far as I understand it. Like, even though he's kind of cheating, it doesn't seem like there's a rule in place to not cheat. I mean, we don't really know the rules of pod racing. They're just super dangerous. They're something that, it doesn't happen too often, it sounds like, in the Republic world. So anything, I mean, Jabba's overlooking them, right? And these are almost like tribute games to Jabba in a way. I know they're celebrating the Boonta Eve, but it really feels like it's just like a tribute to Jabba for his own entertainment that he already gets bored of after one lap around. And Sebulba is going to win at all costs. And again, when it comes to that, the ends justify the means here, right? If he wins, no one really caught him in the moment. It's as us as the viewers, we see that he does that, but no one else is like, hey, Sebulba did that. And Anakin still wins in the end. So he whatever, it's one of those deals where it's like he's going to have a backup plan. I feel like Sebulba thinks he's going to win regardless of whatever's going on, but he's just going to make sure that he wins no matter what. And it does come back to backfire against him there, as he doesn't win in the end. But again, anything's on the table when it comes to these races, from what I can tell, and I think that just adds to the stakes of it, the intricacy of the whole, the whole race itself. I mean, they're dangerous things. I mean, even on the first lap or second lap, Tusken Raiders are shooting at people. I mean,
right?
People die in these things. It's a wild that a 10-year-old is even allowed. Let's just think that's bonkers to begin with. A 10-year-old is a 9-year-old is running is a part of this thing, right? Again, once you have that on the all everything's on the table at that point.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're talking about the outer rim here, right? So anything goes. And I mean, they've made that abundantly clear throughout the entire setup to everything that's been going on, that, the Republic doesn't count out here. The Republic doesn't care about us. Republic credits don't matter, so there's a different set of rules and there's a different set of expectations. So I always thought, Sebulba is one of those kind of people that, if you act like you know what you're doing, nobody's going to question you. So but he was obviously threatened by Anakin, that he was feeling like he needed to sabotage him in some way, shape, or form. But, Anthony, to your point, it was just his insurance policy just to make sure that he won, as well. But, there's always that little bit of grittiness to Sebulba that you just have to love. But yeah, I mean, a 10-year-old, even being in a pod race, and as you mentioned, the Tuskens, just shooting at and even Foden Beat are like, oh, there's some Tuskens parked out on the South Dune, and they're just like,
the crowd
that's just
cheers.
and that's just part of the sport. I mean, that's just part of the whole thing.
Yeah, y'all jumped about 13 points ahead on my outline here, but we'll get back to the Tuskens in a second. Okay, so I want to go over a couple things real quick, because two of these things tie together, and we're going to talk about the middle element first. But so Qui-Gon helps Anakin into his pod, and the advice he gives him is, remember, concentrate on the moment, feel, don't think, use your instincts. Then the Hutts get introduced. Jabba shows up, and Gardula is with him. As an aside, when I was preparing for this, I looked it up. Apparently, Gardula used to own the Boonta Eve Classic and lost control of it the same way she lost Anakin and Shmi due to her gambling problem. The track clears, and then Shmi asks Qui-Gon if Anakin is nervous, and Qui-Gon's response is that he's fine. Padme then rounds on Qui-Gon and says, you Jedi are far too reckless. The Queen is not. And before she can finish that thought, Qui-Gon says, the Queen trusts my judgment, young handmaiden. You should too. And Padme responds is, you assume too much. Okay. The first bit, Qui-Gon is giving that advice to Anakin, and I'm testing a theory out on y'all. And Jay, I'm going to get your input on this one first. Is this pod race his way of testing Anakin's abilities? Is it? I mean, I always thought of this as Qui-Gon believing in Anakin, that Anakin was the chosen one here. But now he's giving him this advice, which is like, hey, remember, concentrate in the moment, feel, don't think, use your instinct. He's giving him advice on this, on how to do this. Is this kind of his own way of satisfying his belief in Anakin, do you think?
Oh, wow. I'd never thought of it that way, quite honestly. And this definitely takes it like 100 steps further than, having Mace go, what do you see? A ship, a cup. I mean, this is like a true test right here for sure, because you could tell he's very, adamant about he's fine. Like he's fine. And you assume too much, from Padme, and the Queen trusts my judgment. And we all know that Qui-Gon knew that Padme was the Queen. So he was very short with her. But that's I love that. I'd never thought of it that way. But Anthony, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the final test. Let's just say that they're seeing is believing in many ways, and Qui-Gon is 100% sure. He's confident. He is the chosen one. He says, "You must see." Like, he doesn't just stand in front of the council and admit that without having the full belief behind it. And he was like, if they have these on Malastare, you must have Jedi reflexes in order to do that. And then he tests them and all that. Like, this is the ultimate, can he back up what he is saying here, right? He's saying that he can do these, Shmi's saying he's got gifts, he can do stuff, he can help you, all that. And this is it's the final test of can he actually win this incredible race where he needs to have the quickest reflexes possible. He even shows his I'm also jumping 1,000 steps here in the pod race itself, but once his ship goes awry, that pressure under fire almost of can he manage the ship that's going at tremendous speeds while an engine is flying off in the other direction and try and collect it together, right? This is certainly Qui-Gon using this as an opportunity to be like, hey, can he do that? Can he do that? Were they just messing with us? Is the midichlorian reading fake? Do I need to retest him again? I certainly think so, and I that's kind of always been my headcanon for this time here, and I do like that. We talked earlier about how much Qui-Gon is like a very kind and empathetic figure in this movie. I do like the short little brief instance here where he does get a little short with people, and he's like a dad that's been at Disney World or Disneyland for 8 hours in the heat, and it's dinner time, and he's a little hangry, and he's ready to go, and he's like, he's fine, he's good. Queen, trust my judgment here.
Yeah,
right.
let's get the ship moving here.
Yeah, and that's the part that made me think about this, because we just had the moment in the hangar where Kitster's like, I'm sure you'll do it this time. And Padme's like, do what? We'll finish the race, of course. And she's like, you've never done this before. You're never even finished. And Anakin's like, yeah, Kitster's right. I'll do it this time for sure. And so, my first instinct is just that, that's what she's reacting to. It's like, you're putting this kid who's never completed a race in here. And on top of that, you're betting everything. But I also think it brings forward to the forefront this notion that Qui-Gon has got so much writing on this, not just his ability to save the Queen, save the Naboo, but it is I believe this kid's the chosen one. And so, this is the proof. This is the evidence I take back to the Jedi Council as to why they should do it. And so, yeah, and I love this. He, throws right back in Padme's face. It's like, Queen, trust my judgment. Wink, wink.
Young
So should you. And she doesn't
I
even,
don't approve.
yeah, and she's like, oh well, okay, I can't give up the joke here that I'm actually the queen.
Yeah, she just plops herself down. And I think too, what is pretty substantial is just as we've come to know just recently is that Qui-Gon was always so incredibly enamored with the prophecies and the predictions and these fulfillment of these different prophecies. And it's almost like, I hate to say that he got desperate to try to prove that, oh my gosh, here is the chosen one. But he was almost giddy with that idea in some ways, and just kind of tying those two threads together from what we found out, since then. And then looking back on this, you can sort of see where maybe that has a little bit of a play in there too.
Yeah.
Can you think of another Jedi that would have done this
in this way?
That would have thrown Anakin into this pod race as the way of making everything work out in the end?
Off the top of my head, probably not. Anthony, can you?
I don't know why, but my brain is thinking that maybe Jedi Dooku would have done something like this. But it just falls in line with who taught who.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
So I'm pulling off of the 2-3 episodes of Tales of the Jedi that we saw. I'm like, Dooku was he thought outside the box a bit when he was still a Jedi. So this might have been an opportunity that he might have taken there.
Yeah, and Sifo Dyas maybe.
Could have been too. One. That's a good point. Yeah.
But do you have anybody in mind, Dennis?
My thought is no other Jedi at this time would have done it. Maybe Obi-Wan in his later years, after a certain amount of accumulated wisdom and his opportunity to commune with Qui-Gon through the Force and some of the lessons he learned there. But I I don't know that any other Jedi would have been able to reach through and find the will of the Force to make this happen this way. And so, I don't know. And it just kind of gets back to the conversation we were having earlier about Qui-Gon and his way of doing things and the ethics he has. Because, I mean, this is reckless. I don't care how much you believe in him. I mean, there's so much writing on this. And now, as he points out to Obi-Wan earlier in the movie, it's like, when he asks, what if this doesn't work? We could be stuck here for a long time. And Han's like, well, what do we got to lose? We're stuck here now and without a way of getting off the planet. So, but there's more than that. You're putting a kid's life on the line when he's never completed the race. No other human can do this. So that's an awfully big leap of faith. When it comes
And,
down to
to that point, though, we've talked about the idea that a lot of the kids in Star Wars are sort of these progenies, and they are well beyond their years when it comes to their abilities. And so, I mean, him being 10 at the time, he was old for a Padawan. So maybe this was something that, at his age, he felt that he needed to be able to be tested to that extent because he was so much older. And this would be sort of the thing that seals the deal in saying, hey, look, this kid's got these abilities.
I hear you. Wow. I hear you, but that goes back to my point. There's no way anyone in the Jedi Council would have done this.
Right.
Because they all were telling him he's too old. You can't train him. I mean, I don't even know why they bothered to test him at the Jedi Temple, because they had no intention of allowing him to train as a Jedi in the first place.
Just to shut Qui-Gon up, basically.
Yeah. And then what's
just
Qui-Gon
to satisfy Qui-Gon.
He continues to throw him into more danger.
Right.
The rest of the movie. So
exactly. What's crazy is that Anakin ends up being very much a master like that with Ahsoka, as we've seen, in throwing her into situations where she has to, do something perilous and well beyond her years.
All right. So we've barely gotten into this race and we are halfway through our conversation. So let's get into a few of the details here. The track clears, and then the racers start their engines. Jabba officially starts the race by biting the head of a frog and spitting at a gong.
Oh, that's classic.
At the Boonta Eve. And immediately Anakin stalls, and so does Ben Quadranaris. Poor Ben will never get off the starting line, as his 4 engines will go flying off in random directions, putting countless spectators in danger. But Anakin gets things going and rapidly gains on the field. And we get our first DNF of the race when Sebulba knocks Mahonic out. Now, Mahonic had the pole position in the race, which I only caught by watching the closed captioning this time around. And kind of going back to what we were earlier, Sebulba is the bad boy of this racing, and he is. While other racers are doing things like swapping paint and trying to knock each other off the track, Sebulba takes it to another level. He uses he flashes his vents. He throws debris into other racers' engines and the like. He's clearly setting himself up as the villain. They pass some. Anakin passes a couple of racers. They race their canyon, and then we get our big cameo. Aurra Sing is seen overlooking the race here. Okay, we never see her in a movie again after this. She only becomes a prominent figure in the Clone Wars. Jay, what was your reaction to seeing Aurra Sing at this point back in the day?
Well, it was one of those things that I didn't know who she was. I didn't know that she had any special kind of significance. So after this movie, I really never gave her another thought. And what's really ironic is that when my own kids were growing up in the early 2000s, and we had these movies on DVD, you don't see her. It's cut off in that particular perspective. So when my now 22-year-old son and I just went in May to see this back in the theaters, that was one of the first things he said. He's like, I never knew Aurra Sing was like standing right there watching the pod race. And I said, yeah, because the perspective, it was like a 16:9 versus a 4:3 or whatever, on the television screen.
Yeah.
So for me, it was just, I didn't really know who she was until much, much, much later. And then she became, one of those kind of cult favorite characters, that we see, very much like, some of these others that, kind of came out of the woodwork and somebody said, oh, that's so cool, and then started cosplaying.
Mhm.
which I know nothing about. But anyway, Anthony,
Right.
what do you think? What were your thoughts?
I will say at first, let's jump ahead to 8-year-old, 9-year-old Anthony, so that we can get to like a cognitive, like, oh, hey, what's that? Which I think was probably the answer when I, watching this movie for the umpteenth thousandth time on either VHS or on TV or on the DVD themselves. It was, oh, that's fun. What's that? And then, of course, I think when I was watching Clone Wars, and of course they bring Aurra more into the fray, then it's like, oh, it's that lady from the Phantom Menace. It's
Mm-hmm.
and of course, then later on, as the aura, let's say, around Aurra Sing has only continued to grow as the fan base has really grown to appreciate and understand this character a lot more through the Clone Wars, of course. And then we get, of course, that wonderful mention in Solo, a Star Wars story,
Mm-hmm.
where she's mentioned with the Tobias Beckett ordeal. So at first, this is the tip of the iceberg storytelling I think is wonderful about Star Wars, where you can have just a character, brief 1-2 seconds introduced into this, and then never talked about again. And then who knows, somewhere down the line, someone picks up that character and is like, let me, that's a fun idea. Let's see what their backstory is and explore their lore and all that, and create this whole new canon around them that leads to people cosplaying this character and forming these friendships around that, and it's just really
Mm-hmm.
awesome that we can have this in Star Wars now.
Oh, I agree. It's like the running of the hoods,
Yeah,
Willow Hood.
exactly.
It's like these, like I was saying, these little obscure characters that, or prune face, that kind of thing that become like blows up in the fandom.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, my memory is back in the day after the Phantom Menace and while Attack of the Clones was in development, that there's a lot of rumors going around that Aurra Sing was going to show up as a bounty hunter in Attack of the Clones.
Hmm.
And I can't help but wonder if people just expected, that had some idea that there were, Zam Wessel was at the beginning of this movie, that was the bounty hunter, and so they put 2 and 2 together. And but I didn't get a chance to research that, so we'll move on. But we get the aforementioned fate of Rats Terrell when he crashes in the cave, and then the Tuskens. We made mention of them taking pot shots at the racers at the Canyon Dune turn. Quad Generis' engines lose their power couplings and fly off and crash. And Sebulba is in first after the first circuit. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on any one of these elements because we've kind of brought them up all already here. But of those, we kind of talked about the Tuskens earlier, but I just absolutely love the fact that they were there, and they got the Podracers going right through their territory.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than raid a village, they just start taking pot shots at it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they actually hit one, they all celebrate eventually about it.
Mm-hmm.
Any of those other moments stand out to you guys, though?
Anthony, for you?
Yeah, so I'm just going to say, just having the Tuskens involved here means a lot more after the Book of Boba Fett, because, they're going directly through their territory and land. And before, I'm like, oh, it's just Tuskens just trying to be a nuisance and take out people. And now that, we have that context, I'm like, oh, they're actually just driving through their land, and they have every right to defend themselves. It's in my opinion now. So, with it is the glory of just like, you have one thing in 1999 come out, and then a new story comes out in 2021. It allows us to recontextualize things that have come in the past and review it through a different lens, and it just makes the world a lot more enriched because of that. So, that's the true benefit to expanded universe of Star Wars storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
No, I agree. And I appreciate at the very beginning as well, just seeing that one Feline that's dressed in a, semi-similar costume as what Leia was wearing in Return of the Jedi, as one of, Jabba's slave girls kind of thing. And
Yeah,
just seeing Bib Fortuna there as well. And, just having those little callbacks. And that, I just thought that was cool.
All right, so from there, Odie Mandrill tries to make a pit stop, only to have one of his pit droids come wandering out on the track and get sucked through the engine,
Oh, that
knocking
is so
him out of
great.
the race. Jabba is already bored of this race and ends up tossing Anuna off the balcony because he gets distracted by that. Anakin completes his first lap, and he ends up going side by side with Team 2 Pagalis. I'm taking a complete guess on how you pronounce that last name. And he manages to get around him by flipping his pod over him. So, some fancy flying there. And then Sebulba knocks another racer out by tossing a piece of metal or a tool back into Mars Guau's engine there. Okay, so uh, we talked a bit about how colorful a collection of pod racers we have here, but what of these moments stands out to you? Jay, you get to go first on this one.
Oh, just the fact that, I mean, all of the sound. I know that we've talked about this before, and everyone always points this out, especially with Sebulba's pod, just that doo 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 doo, and
Mhm.
getting to experience that, just, you feel it in your tusk kind of a thing. And just the fact that Anakin is so calm. He's just very calm, he's very calculated. He just does what he needs to do. And then in the meantime, all of the I'm it's just trying to think to myself how incredibly fast all of this stuff is has to be flying by.
Mhm.
And Anthony, as you mentioned earlier, and thinking about the speeder bikes in Return of the Jedi, and just the
Mhm.
fact that Leia, as she was driving her speeder bike, and Luke, and the fact that those trees were going by so fast as well, is just kind of a mirrored moment in my brain pan now.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good point because this track was dozens and dozens of miles long, if
Mhm.
not 100 or so. And it had to be because as fast as they were going, you couldn't make tight turns like you could on a Formula One track or an IndyCar track or anything like that. Anthony, any parts of that stick out to you?
Yeah, so for me, I will say I love the like the the how does one say it, where like the kiss of death, basically, where when they say at the beginning like, oh, his pit crew is one of the best, and
Yeah.
and I'm
Oh
like, well,
yeah.
they set him up there right there. And then of course I love the practical effect too of it all, where it looks like they've built the pod and then blow the engine, at least when they get struck through, and then it blows up a little bit there because of that. I think that's really cool. um Jay, I love what you said about the sound design of all this. It is absolutely beautiful, and I was gonna sing its praises, and I will just echo what you've already said there on that front. But yes, anding what you've already said there, I think uh, the editing of this whole, I mean, the whole movie is really, really well edited, but this sequence especially is a testament to Ben Burtt's editing, especially with this new digital editing techniques that they've been employing within this movie, because this is a 15-minute sequence, as we've talked about already here, where Jabba's already bored, as we can tell, but as the audience, you're just encapsulated by this whole sequence here, where you're like, what is happening here? These characters are doing this, these are doing that. It just is. George's mantra, faster, more intense, is literally out on display in this whole sequence here, which I think is totally awesome. And I do want to give a um, Dennis. It's funny that you mentioned that this track is really long, many miles long, and in fact, in uh, was it 11th grade or 12th grade? I think it was 11th grade. That's when I took pre-calc. My pre-calc teacher for one of the days had us actually watch this whole sequence in class, and then we had to figure out the length and distances with our calculations with everything for how
That's
much
cool.
each person actually went with their pod before it blew up or they passed on, and how far like each character went with their journeys. And uh, honestly, the best day in the worst class ever. But
Sure.
I think Mrs. Warner was the teacher. So if you're listening to this, I apologize, but I never used that ever since. So um, just a testament to the sound design team. I know there's a lot of practical effects throughout this movie, but the scene specifically has a lot in there, in addition to the wonderful CG work that ILM did across the board. So
Mhm.
kudos to all the team behind the scenes involved in this.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, what a great way to utilize a lesson. That is awesome. I love that. And I have a lot of friends that will skip through the pod race scene. And
Really? What?
I never understood why. And I don't know if maybe it was just because I was brought up on motorsports and just sports in general, that I mean this definitely has that kind of Sunday, Sunday, Sunday sort of vibe, to it as well. And I can't help, I always reference Robot Chicken, and there is a scene in Robot Chicken where they actually talk about that. But yeah, I always look forward to the scene, and it's the fact that it's 15 minutes long actually fascinates me, because I never
Mhm.
realized it was that long, because for me it goes by so fast.
Yeah, it is like, you snap your fingers and it's done, right? Anakin is
Yeah.
being paraded by everybody and lifted up into the rafters after winning, and it's so funny that people, in your uh, passing by,
Yeah.
Jay have just skipped over the scene. Like I'm reminded of a story in college where my freshman year we had a Saudi Arabian exchange student come, and he was interested in learning about and just absorbing all things American culture. And I was like, well, probably the most Western culture that I can think of is watching Star Wars, and he'd never watched it before. So of course I was like, let's start with episode 1 and see how you like it. Because if you like that, then chances are you'll like the rest of it. And we watched the entire movie, and he was just awestruck at this whole sequence here. And he's like, that is some of the best cinema I've ever seen in my life. And I know, going back to the cinema for this anniversary series here, everybody had their, illegally, they shouldn't have done it, but they had their phones out to record this whole sequence here. And it just, again, shows the testament to this whole sequence 25 years later as we're celebrating it in this series.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, and one of the things that stands out about this is, you talked about the editing and we talked about the sound design, but once the race starts, there's almost no music.
True.
Until the race
That
ends.
is true. Yeah.
The race provides its own soundtrack here.
Oh, that's a great point.
I mean, those engines, that's its own symphony itself.
Mm-hmm. And Jay, the point I think you just made was, in the theaters, when you get a good surround sound system, it just even makes this come more to life in there. And so that's one of the reasons I was thrilled to get back to the theaters and see it on the re-release for its 25th anniversary this year. Okay, so where were we? Okay, so yeah, Anakin's Podracer starts spinning out of control, and he ends up having to use a tool in order to magnetically grab the cable and reattach to the side of his pod. And he gets back into that's how fast his pod is. I mean, like 3 times in the course of this, he stalls, he has this happen, and then later that part falls off, and he falls back only to catch up and pass everybody again. So he wasn't just bragging when he said it was the fastest ever built at the beginning, several scenes ago back in his mom's kitchen. And then the Tuskens are successful at knocking Teamto out of there. Sebulba's still in the lead after 2 laps, followed by Anakin. And now this is when it really becomes mano a mano between Sebulba and Anakin. They get to the service ramp, and Sebulba knocks him over onto the ramp. Anakin goes flying off into the air, closes vents so he can gain some control, and then lands right back in front of Sebulba to take the lead for the first time. And we get our little Jawa cameo. I love that one. And then the part Sebulba had sabotage falls off, and so Anakin starts to lose speed, but he gets it fixed and catches up with Sebulba and gets entangled. I'm covering a lot, but that's because we're down just a few minutes left in this segment here. And then they get entangled, and as they separate, this is what causes Sebulba's engines to lose their power coupling, and then they fly apart. He crashes, and he does not even finish the race, and Anakin wins. So it's a thrilling climax. Okay, Anthony, one of the things you said is that you got friends that will skip over the pod race, and we've been lauding it for all of its technical achievement here and stuff like that. And okay, it's Star Wars, I get that. It's a space opera, and so a lot of things happen, and we have to put some degree of realism aside. But do you think is that they skip it just because how absolutely bizarre it gets for Anakin, and how maybe the odds were a little too crazy for him to overcome? Or what do you think?
Well, I think Jay, was it your friends that have skipped this part? So I'll pass this off to you.
Oh, yeah, it was my friends that had said that. But so I don't know. You're good. So I don't know if it's just because the fact that it's sports, whatever, kind of a thing, that they're in it more for the story, quote unquote, than they are for this type of action or suspense. So honestly, I don't know, but I'm always mesmerized by this, and just the idea that it's happening so fast. It's just I'm an adrenaline junkie anyway, so I mean, I just feel like this is just right up my alley. But yeah, so I'm not exactly really sure.
Yeah, I wish it were longer, frankly. So
me too.
And I will say too, I mean, this is just the Phantom Menace in general, but this feels like a third act climax of a movie where it's in the center of the movie too. You have a whole other sequence after this too. So it's just the Phantom Menace doesn't really follow standard 3-act film structure as we know it up to this point, which I think is just George going outside the box and being avant-garde on things and saying, yeah, I want to put a 15-minute racing sequence in this movie, and by golly, I'm going to do it.
right in the middle. Yeah, I mean, this really
Yeah.
is it's not a long act, but it is the second act of the movie, and this is the climax of it right here. And of course, the third is the Battle of Naboo. The first was
Mhm.
the escape from Naboo. So yeah, I don't know. I think this is fantastic. It's something. I think the first time I watched it, I wasn't absorbing all the grandeur of the race, but on
Mhm.
subsequent viewings, it was like, wow, there's really so much here that happens. And then when you think about, like, none of that scenery is real. They didn't go out to any desert and like record this. They made
Yeah.
all that stuff.
Right.
That's all computer generated. And the stadium is a gigantic model that they made. It was a miniature, I should say. That they used for some of the opening scenes and things like that. And just the degree of effort that they went to pull this off is just really quite impressive. So Anakin wins. And Sebulba corrects, Pluto is his exclamation, and yeah, you got Foden Bede celebrating there. Anthony's that here on a recording. You get the clumsy attempt by Wald and Kitster to do a high five and completely miss, and then play it off
Yeah.
like they do. They do a little dance celebration move anyway, and then the fans surround Anakin. Watto's angry, and Jabba is asleep. So yeah, I just wrapped everything up there pretty quickly, but that brings us to the end of the race. And we'll get into the aftermath of that on the next segment we do here. But I feel like we've talked about the implications of this and the technical sides of it, but what else stands out to you about this? Any other final thoughts you have on it, Anthony?
Yeah, so I do like in the just that whole last third lap where it's basically, like you said, mano a mano between Sebulba and Anakin. It does feel like that David and Goliath kind of battle that they were going for in this sequence, where at times it looks like it's like Sebulba's pod is double the size of Anakin's,
Mm-hmm.
especially when he gets really close and he's just behind him there, creeping up on him. And I think that just is really great visual storytelling there of how incredible this feat is that Anakin is about to do, especially with all the odds that we had noted against him, whether it be basically doing this track in 2.5 times the speed of everybody else to even catch up to this point to be in the lead at where he's at. I think that's excellent. And then, of course, the ultimate victory, Poodoo.
Yes.
I love just seeing Sebulba's thing, his pod just slide across the sand there so quietly and calmly, and then just come to a stop and go, Poodoo.
He
I
went
think
through all that
every time I
effort
watch,
to cheat for naught.
exactly, for nothing. I think every time that I watch that sequence, I do Poodoo at the same time as him. It's just a great way to cut off that entire sequence and close it out. And I will say too, I do love the missed high five between Kitster and Wald. That is and in my friends group, it was I know people for the original trilogy love the stormtrooper hitting his head going
Right.
through the doors there. And for me and my friend group, it was did you miss the missed high five there? Did you see that? And then we would recreate it all the time on the playground. We would intentionally miss our high fives to recreate that sequence.
That is great. Oh my gosh, that's so awesome. Now, I also appreciate what you said about the David and Goliath feel there, and you're absolutely right. And that was always so striking to me as well, just the difference in the
Hmm.
sizes of those pods. And I do like the fact that Sebulba didn't perish as some of the other pod racers did.
Yeah.
And, and I think that maybe some of that too was perhaps for Anakin to know that, if he would have caused Sebulba's death, that he would have felt awful about
Hmm.
winning the race, but he won, quote unquote, fair and square in
Sure
his
did.
eyes.
Was it in the novelization or elsewhere that it was Sebulba that ended up buying the pod from Qui-Gon?
That'd be cool.
That is a good question. And I
Mhm.
wanted to revisit the novelization before you recorded, and I did
Mhm.
not get a chance to. So I can't answer that question.
Yeah, I remember reading that somewhere, but for the life of me, I can't say for certainty where it was. But I
Mm.
don't know. Sebulba in that pod is terrifying. So
It's true. It's true.
yeah.
And just one more thing I wanted to say about this whole sequence as well is I just feel like it encapsulates so much of not only our culture just in general with sports in America. You think about it. as far as the vendors go, I mean, they're selling, those creatures to the people in the stands, and just the fact that people are, enjoying something like this and whatnot. And not just in America, but of course all over the world. But it just reminds me of, being at a NASCAR race kind of a thing.
Mhm.
And I just think that that's maybe why it's kind of endearing to a lot of people in that way as well. And quick aside, I did see, this was a long time ago, that when they were doing the actual filming of this, that in some of the scenes, they set up the people in the stands and they were all Q-tips.
Mhm.
Did you guys see this as well?
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. That's one of my favorite details too. To
I
point
know,
out to people.
right? Yep. It's always so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, you can really get a lot of great detail on this and the various behind the scenes featurettes that are out there. And again, I can't remember which one of the model designers was, but he's like lying down working on this model. And it's like, and you're like, wow, that thing
Yeah.
looks huge in the
Yeah.
movie. And it's just, it's still a pretty decent sized model, but it's, a person's larger than it is. So,
And
all
it
right.
still remains my favorite of all Lego Star Wars games to play.
Oh, okay. All
Love
right.
this one.
Well, that brings us to the end of the segment. The pod race is over. Anakin has won, and we'll deal with the aftermath of that on our next segment in our Phantom Menace series next month. But before we let you go, Anthony, thank you so much for showing up and helping us out with this. Love the work you do over on Force Ghost Conversations. Why don't you let our listeners know a little bit more about that and where they can find you?
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me back on the show to talk about this pivotal sequence of the movie. And I like to point out to people that the rest of Star Wars doesn't happen if Anakin doesn't win this pod race. So this is really the linchpin of the entire saga up to this point. So you can find me and my podcast, Force Ghost Conversations, on any platform that has podcasts these days: Spotify, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, really any place you can find us there. And we do cozy deep dive discussions into all things Star Wars and sometimes the Lucasfilm adjacent things. So if there's an Indiana Jones or Rebel Moon thing, we'll talk about that to some degree as well. And if you want to follow us on all the social media channels, we're of course on X, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook. Just search for Force Ghost Conversations and we'll be there in some way, shape, or form again.
Sounds great. Well, thanks again for joining us. All right, there you have it. That was our discussion of the pod race. And, it's interesting because since it doesn't have a lot of dialogue, like 90% of the dialogue is in the first minute of that segment we just talked about. I didn't think it was going to take that long to get through, but there are so many details and so much stuff that's behind the scene that's come out over the years that it really did lend itself to one of our regular full-length episodes.
Oh, absolutely. And it's always so impressive to me just how much our guests are always able to pull out of different things and just the different perspectives that we're all able to explore because of our conversation. So I always cherish these deep dives for sure.
Indeed. So, yeah, and so we got a lot of great things are coming up. In the next segment, we got Darth Maul and Qui-Gon going at it, and we transitioned to Coruscant. So, plenty of great segments to come here in this series. But
Absolutely.
with that, I just want to thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and yet another installment in our Phantom Menace series. We hope you enjoyed the episode and this series so far. And if you had, make sure you subscribe to Podcast Stars on your podcatcher choice, and then you'll get all the future entries, one per month, that we have for the Phantom Menace, along as well as all the other content that we have here on the show. Also, like to remind you can find our entire catalog of shows over on retrozap.com, which is home to several other great podcasts covering everything from the MCU and DC to Dune, Star Trek, and a whole lot more. And if you got a spare moment and want to help out the show, the best way you can do that is to head over to Apple Podcasts or your podcatcher of choice and leave us a 5-star rating and review. You probably listen to enough podcasts that that ratings and reviews are the best way to kind of help drive the algorithms and put the show in front of more eyeballs. And I guess in the ears of more listeners is a more apt way of saying it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we appreciate it when you share the show on social media with your friends. So with that in mind, Jay, want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are.
Absolutely. And we just want to say hello there to all of our new listeners and welcome back to all of our faithful as well. And so, as Dennis was just saying, it's always great for everyone to share out the show. And so, you can do that on social media on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Podcast Stardust. And you can also check out our plethora of other places on the World Wide Web, such as our YouTube and YouTube music links. And both of those, we would love it if you would head over there, like and subscribe. And we also have some Pinterest boards, and we are on Spotify and all of your other streaming platforms as well. We do have a Discord room through the RetroZep Discord server. So if you want to check that out, you can just hit up the link in our show notes. And then we do have a TeePublic store. So if you are in need of some new Podcast Stardust apparel, head over to, once again, the link in our show notes, and you can check out all the things that we have to offer. We have 7 different show logo designs available on everything from home goods and apparel and pretty much everything in between. So check that out. And you can also check out our Saber Masters collaboration. So if you head over to sabermasters.com and you are in need of a lightsaber, we highly recommend heading over to Saber Masters to pick one of those up. And if you do, make sure that you put in the code Stardust at checkout and you can receive an extra $10 off. And it also helps to support the show. So if you are interested in that, just head over to, once again, the link in our show notes, or you can go to sabermasters.com. So Dennis, I know you've had other things going on here lately, but anything new going on with Warp Trails or any other podcasting adventures that you want to let everybody know about?
Well, the news with regards to Warp Trails is that we're behind on finishing up season 5 of Discovery, which is over and has been over for a few weeks. But that's what happens during the summer. You'd think it'd be easier for my wife and I to record podcasts, but it actually becomes more difficult. But anyway, we're back from our travels. Thank you all for indulging all the bonus episodes that Jay and I did with special guests for the past few months. And my wife and I are starting to catch up on Discovery, and we will be getting to our wrap-up episodes of season 5. Haven't decided yet if we're going to do one per episode or if we're going to cover them all at the same time. But that'll be over on the Step Podcast feed sometime soon. Jay, I've been following you on Instagram. I know you've been doing a lot with cosplay lately. What is the latest?
All right. Well, you can always check out my adventures on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And I've been very fortunate here lately to be able to be involved in several different things through Operation Fandom here in Medina. I spent some time with Vanessa Marshall, and also through Rubber City Cosplay. And I got an opportunity to participate in a Fae Masquerade, which was a heck of a lot of fun. And so once again, you can check all that out and more at j.snipscosplay.
Okay, upcoming on the show on Wednesday, we have Jay's lifestyle and fashion segment devoted to Star Wars, which is called World Between Worlds. And then on Friday, we'll be getting back to some Star Wars news. So we took this past week off because we wanted to catch up on the Acolyte. We'll be rounding up all the news from the past couple of weeks. I haven't even really looked to see what's there, but we'll fill you in when we get there. But if that having been said, thanks for listening to episode 746 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, of course.